People always ask how I balance my family life with 400 shows a year. I'm just doing what I love with the people I love. It's my magic life.
I like Wes Iseli. I like everything about him.
All right, on today's episode, we have a certified couples therapist who speaks at colleges all around the country. She has her own practice in Anaheim Hill, California, where she works with couples, children of divorced families, and folks with trauma in the military community. On top of all that, she has a brand new show on JUL-TV. Everybody, let's welcome Dr. Dorothy O'Neill. Hi, Dr. Dorothy, how are you?
Hi, thank you for calling. I'm doing great, thank you.
I just realized, what do I call you? I don't want to be disrespectful. Do I call you Miss O'Neill, Dr. Dorothy O'Neill, Dr. O'Neill?
You can just call me Dr. O'Neill or Dorothy, whichever you're more comfortable with. I'm great with both.
I might have to feel them both out during this conversation. We're figuring it out. Anyway, welcome to the JUL-TV family. This is awesome.
Thank you.
So, I know I missed stuff in that introduction, like you being an author and a ton more. How was that introduction? Did I do okay?
Oh, you did. I'm definitely, I present at universities around the country. I also teach at several universities about couples. I'm a couples and certified therapist through a field called integrated behavioral couples therapy. That's a theory that I use. I also wrote a book on the rules of engagement. That's the name of the book, learning from 9 couples who made marriage work. The book was based in research. It wasn't just a whim. And it helped me really understand why couples stay together, although they have the same issues as couples that get divorced. So my second book is on co-parenting successfully. So that's really about me. I'm a mother of 2 and from England. That's why I have this accent. And I see all kinds of people in my work in Anaheim Hills. As I say, I predominantly work with couples, but I do work with a lot of families too, of children that are having difficulties, especially during this pandemic.
Well, you have so much going on. I mean, even booking this this podcast has been a challenge here. Well, how do you fit it on your schedule? How do you do it all?
Well, I actually have an ability to fill my day completely. I grew up with a mother who had 8 children. I'm one of them. And my father died when we were under the age of 12. And she really taught us well because we grew up in poverty in England. We had an outside toilet and a tin tub we carried in on Fridays.
Wow.
And no money except a small amount of money that she made. But she grew a garden full of vegetables. She knitted our sweaters. She went to work, picked us up from school, cooked everything from the main meal to cookies to cakes. We had nothing store-bought. So I had a great teacher on how to keep going, do a lot of things, and really never think that you're overwhelmed.
Wow.
That's
So,
great.
2 questions. What happened to your dad? How did he pass away?
My father died when I was 7 of cancer.
Aww.
And
Wow.
My eldest sister was 12 and my youngest sister was 2. And my mother was Italian. Her English, she had broken English, and also she had a disability. She limped. So she had a tremendous amount of disadvantages, but never one of them was a disadvantage. She always looked at the grass is greener in her garden, not on the other side. And so she taught all of us to become successful, work hard, and enjoy it, and not look at it as if we're overwhelmed.
That is so awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, coming from all of that and getting that out of it instead of, oh, me, poor us, why us.
Right.
That's awesome.
All right.
That really is.
So is your mom still around?
Yeah. No, sorry. No, my mother passed away a few years ago. She was 93.
Oh, wow.
And it was a huge loss because, again, all of us only ever had her. She never dated or had relationships because she believed that she had a job to do, and that was to take care of her children. And I think part of that was cultural. She was Italian, so there was really that idea of family. We were lucky she was Italian because she was an amazing cook. But also there was that responsibility to be a parent and to put her children first. And so relationships really weren't an issue for her until we were out of high school.
Wow. Are all your siblings still over in Europe?
One of them lived here for a while. She just moved back. My other siblings live in different areas in England. My sister Angelina passed away just recently, and my brother Michael, so we're down to 6. I think that's the disadvantage of coming from a large family. You have a lot of losses ahead of you, and so that was tough, but we're very, very close. And as I said, every one of them is successful, which is always for me a huge thing, because I look at people that struggle and they can't make ends meet, and I often look at society and wonder, how did we get to this place where there isn't that sort of idea that I can do it, and it doesn't just come from someone saying that, it sort of comes from society too. And she is definitely a huge role model for me, and definitely does become part of my work with couples that, especially parents that are struggling to manage. And so that's, I often have that conversation about what that means.
Well, I mean, you're over here and you're like, really? You guys are struggling? You have this. I would bring it up in every meeting if I was you. I had nothing. We had a 10 tub on Fridays. What is your problem, really?
Right.
Golly.
Well, part of me, there is that that psychology part of me, and then there's that person who is, oh my gosh, how can you not manage? My mom had 8 children and babies and did it, but that's not really my role. My role is to meet people where they're at in the room and to really look at what that means. I have a great mentor, Dr. Andrew Christensen, who's the founder of the theory that I'm certified in. And at lunch one day, we were talking, and I said, Andy, I have this horrible thing that comes over me at times. I sit there and I think, oh my gosh, get over yourself. That's what I want to say. You can do it. If my mother can do it, you can do it. And he laughed, and I said, I don't want to feel that way, because that's not my role. And he made a very, very valid point that in my mother's era, mothers did certain things. In this era, parents tend to think that they have to do it all for the child. My mother could put us in a playpen or send us out to the back garden or onto the street to play and get on with what she had to do. And he made this, it was a wonderful point, that today's parents really feel like they have to do it all. They have to go to Mummy and Me class, they have to go to gym class, then they have to go to music class. So the day is so filled up with just the occupation of being a parent that the rest tends to either have to find a place or not be included. And that was a really good epiphany for me, to actually sit and listen to him. And I really could see, when my parents come into the room, to have a much more compassionate view of their role, rather than comparing it to a role that my mother had.
Well, see, in my line of work, we're magicians and we're on the road all the time. But I was doing restaurants. I did restaurants for 20 years where I'd come on a family night and do, close-up magic at the tables. And I would talk to the customers. They'd become like family and friends. And I'd say, hey, what was your day like? Well, ballet class. Then we had this. And, this weekend we went, 3 hours north for a baseball game. And then they had 3 baseball games. And then yesterday we did this and they did this. And I'm like, and you have a real job? How do you guys... It's crazy to think. How can they do that? My little girl takes ballet lessons, but the lady's like, if you don't show up one week, oh well. Some of the ballet classes they teach, if you don't show up, you have to make it up, and if you miss 2 weeks in a row, that means you have to take 3 lessons the 3rd week. And it's like, we can't do that. We're on the road all the time. I don't see how these parents do that. Yeah, it's crazy what is thrown on everybody's shoulders nowadays.
I do think you're absolutely right. And that description of that person in the restaurant is exactly the description of the couples in my room. And when we look at that, that's one of the reasons we also get the discourse in a relationship is there's very little time to be the couple. It's once they have children, it's all about the parenting, but parenting in a belief that really doesn't need to be the way it is today. I think that we've lost sight of being comfortable with who we are as a parent, and that we're okay to do that job. We don't need to have all this external influence for our child to develop. You know, sitting on the sofa with a book and just being with our child, or a child playing on the floor while we're cooking dinner, or even in a playpen, which you don't hardly ever see anymore, or being popped in their crib for a couple of hours while you get something done for yourself. There's a real disconnect in the old school parenting, which I think has so much value, and I think the new parenting has value too, where in the old school it was very much a mother's task. Today it's both partners are working, whether you're a same-sex couple or you're a heterosexual couple. Both partners now do the work in family situations rather than just the mother. So I think that's a big change.
I mean, since we're on the road all the time, I mean, we do put our little boys in the playpen, but we also take the babysitter on the road with us and have them, hang out with the boys while we're doing a show. We have 1-year-old twins. And, I know my wife's aunt told us, you can't set those kids in front of the TV. You need to be able to play with them. And it's like, we have to return phone calls to book shows. Somebody's got to cook breakfast. I can't have this girl on the payroll 24 hours a day. It's got to be done. That's just, maybe I'm an old school parenting person, I guess. I don't know.
Well, I think it's that balance. It's the two-income family. That's made a big difference. Both you and your wife, you were saying, are both working, so that changes the dynamics. My mother worked, of course, because there was only one income, and she had a horrible job because it was the best job she could do. She worked at the local mental asylum, which was what it was called in those days, and she worked in the laundry that was in the basement, and they didn't have dryers or machines. They used the old wringers, and so she would go there after she dropped us off from school, work there all day, and then pick us up on the way home because there was only one income. But what she did was she sort of laid her time out so that she could be that mother who had to do all those things, which cook dinner, polish our shoes, get our uniforms ready for the next day for school. There was a whole slew of things, and what she didn't have was really time for her. But in her defense, her family was her. We were what made her who she is, and she made us who we are. There was that fluidity of love that went between us that was enough to sustain her. And I think today couples miss out on each other when they are so busy with everything else, and especially when it comes to parenting.
I want to meet your mom. You wrote books on other things, but I want a book about your mom. I want a movie about your mom. Your mom sounds like an amazing person.
She was amazing. She grew up in Italy, and she was during the time she was there, and she met my father in 1945 during the liberation of Italy. She was under Nazi occupation during a period of that time before the liberation, where she would watch many of her friends disappear or be slaughtered in the square. Aww. And so she had it was a very harsh period. But she met my father, and they fell in love, and they married within weeks, and he put her on the train to England, stowed her away, and brought her to England, and they married, and that was it. They started to produce the Oneill family. And I would say to her, how did you and Dad even talk? Because he didn't speak Italian, you didn't speak English. And she used to say, love doesn't need words. And but she had a very short period with my father because, of course, he died pretty young. and leaving 8 children behind. But she did travel with him considerably. He was the boxing coach for South Africa during the Olympics after the war.
Oh, very cool.
Wow.
Yes. Yeah, so 2 of my siblings are born in South Africa, and the rest of us are all born in England. So yes, she had a very colourful life, and then went on to become an awesome parent.
So, with all of that background and all amazing parents, what got you interested in couples therapy?
So I was a interior designer for a good part, for 40 years. I actually worked in design, and I would work with couples. And it's amazing because when I present around the country, I often say I was a therapist long before I got my degree, because I was always navigating what couples could achieve and how they could navigate decision making and financial issues. So when I was working one day, I was busy, and I thought, I would love to get a degree in psychology. So I decided, right by my office was Vanguard University, very close. So I walked in one day and said, I'd like to do the BA program in psychology, and they signed me up. And so that's how it started. I did it really more for fun because I loved the field of psychology. So after I got my bachelor's, I thought to myself, well, you know what, I might as well get my master's because I'm already enjoying it. And so I went on to get my master's. And at the end of my master's, I was starting to see clients because I was now doing internships. And I was sitting there one day and I thought, you know what, I might as well get my doctorate. There's no really any reason to stop right now. So I went all the way to get my PsyD, which is a PhD in psychology. And that was it. So it sort of led me down a different path. I still do a couple of design jobs just because I did it for so long. I have couples that won't let me go, older couples that say they just think they're too old to find a new person. And so I squeeze them in with doing everything else that I do. But I went back to school at 50 and I graduated at 61 with a doctorate.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's great.
Yeah.
Well,
I
here,
went to,
go ahead.
sorry.
Go.
Yeah, so I went to school 11 years straight through.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That is amazing. Going back and going to school. My mom did that. My dad had Parkinson's, and my mom knew that she was going to be the only breadwinner. So my dad was the breadwinner, and when my dad had Parkinson's, she went back to school to become a nurse. And to see her do that, as an adult, and, crying over the table trying to get straight A's, and she did. She got straight A's, but if she got a B, she'd bawl like a baby. And just seeing that and seeing that determination in an adult, God bless you. I think you get that from your mom, though. Just determination and go to it, stick to itness.
You know what's funny? They used to say you cannot get a PhD and work, and I'm thinking, well, I got a PhD and I worked, and I was a single parent of 2 children, and I ran a design firm. So it was like, and I really didn't struggle. Not only did I enjoy it, I didn't miss any of it. I mean, I was totally invested, and I learned a lot from it. And that's what led me into writing my book, because my book is my dissertation. It is the research from my PsyD. And so once I'd finished and I was working, I just thought I really should put this. It was so intriguing to find the information I found out about couples that do not get divorced. So my research was a phenomenological study, which means that you actually interview rather than do statistical data. And so I got to interview couples that were Christian, agnostic, Hindu, they were Muslim, married for anywhere from 16 years on, never been in therapy, and had children, and had to score above a 65 on the couple satisfaction index, which was part of the participation requirement. So it was a great experience, because not only was I working on my dissertation, I was actually intrigued by what these couples would share with me. And what I found throughout my interviews was they would actually say the same thing. It wasn't that they had the same idea. Sometimes they would use exactly the same lines.
And you question them independently, not together, correct?
Oh, totally independently.
Right,
They
right, yeah.
each other. I was using the same set of questions so that the research had validity, and so the questions were very, very open-ended, but they would often refer to similar situations and how they work through them. So it was a great research, and I was able then to transfer that into more of a layperson's language, and then write about the different areas of finance, extended family, parenting, family dynamics, co-parenting as a team, understanding differences. And one of the big things that I found came out of the interviews was how much they related to the preservation of the couplehood, that it wasn't about winning, that they actually won when the couplehood won. So they may not get what they wanted in that discourse or that argument, but they preserved the couple. And that was one of the most important things, and that was consistent through all of the interviews.
Wow. Well, so is there a number that, I know they have statistics, 50% of the people get divorced or whatever. You said you were a single mother. Were you divorced?
I was, but I learned a lot from my research, and I also learned a lot from understanding myself as a partner in a relationship. By doing this dissertation, I grew. I started to co-parent. I co-parented from the beginning with my former spouse, not on an easy basis in the beginning. It was never really contentious like many couples, but it really was difficult to have gone through a divorce. However, within the first year, we started to co-parent together. And so I really became my mother, which is crazy, but as a woman today of a 24-year-old and a 23-year-old, I look back and I realize that I was my mother. I took care of my children alone and never dated for the same reason, so that they wouldn't have an entourage of relationships coming in and out, and they needed me. And Ron, actually, their father, did the same thing. He lives across the street down the road, and we shared our co-parenting until the girls didn't need us anymore. They'll always need us because they're always coming back to something. But they had two parents that were able to take care of them. So I do believe that writing the book and understanding relationships helped me secure a much more understanding and tolerant relationship with my former husband. It made me understand his differences. I understood more about how he saw his extended family, how we both saw finances differently. We actually got divorced after 7 years of marriage with actually none of the things that many couples get divorced for, which is adultery or an addiction. That we actually got divorced because of our differences. And those differences often create divorce. And if couples could understand that differences aren't a bad thing, that they are something you need to understand. I often, when I'm presenting, I tell this story about cooking. So my mother, she, as I told you, she was a great cook, and she cooked for us a lot, everything. She even cooked for the children on the street. Sometimes she'd go to the window, the kitchen window, and throw it open, and she would shout out, "Come on, manja, manja." And she'd tell all these little scruffy kids, because we lived in a very, very poor, very, very poor area. She would bring these children in whose parents definitely weren't my mother, who was the cook, and they would come in and she'd make this big pot of spaghetti and she'd feed everybody. She was a very generous woman in her heart. But Ron grew up with parents who never got divorced and had 2 boys, and they just ate because you had to eat to live. So they would come in, they might grab something to eat. They always had dinner together as a family, but it was always on to something else, baseball or something. In our house, imagine the only time we really had our mother where she would sit down was around that table. And when we ate, it was the time that we got to spend time with her. And so my understanding of food really correlates to love. And Ron's just correlates to survival, just eating for the sake of eating. So during our marriage in the early stage, I would cook. Cooking's my hobby. I love cooking. I'm a great cook. And I would make these meals, and I'm a new wife, and I'm really excited, and he's driving home, and I would text him, or I'd call him and say, you know, dinner's on the table, I've made this great meal, and he would say, oh, he said, I'm not going to eat, I'm not hungry, I had a late lunch. And so for me, I would seethe. And so he would walk through the door, and I would be this angry. I'd be DEFCON 3, that's what we used to call it.
Oh.
So he'd come in, or another time he'd come in, he'd walk through the door, and I would tell him I'm making dinner, and he'd say, okay. But he would get halfway home, and he'd be so hungry, he'd pull over and get a hamburger.
Oh, no.
And when he'd walk through the door. And the reason being is not because he didn't appreciate the fact I was a cook. He never understood the fact what it meant to me. To him, it was just food. To me, it was how I showed my love, and he was rejecting me.
Yeah.
But in later years, as we've talked about this, I can ask him for dinner now, and he can say he's coming, then say he's not coming, and I don't get upset. And it's not just because we're divorced, because we still co-parent with our children. We do things together as a family. We spend time together. But because I know he's not hungry. But when our differences, which is how we saw food, was personal rather than an issue, we responded differently. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. So what do you think, folks, pre-marriage, if somebody was to come to you or you give a talk at colleges, what should they make sure they are aware of before entering a marriage?
Well, I think it's really good to understand who you are. Because when you marry, you bring everybody into the marriage. You bring your mother and father, and you bring his mother and father, and the 2 of you. So there's 6 people in that marriage. And so you have to understand, if you don't understand who those 6 are, then you can be triggered, or you can take something very personal that really doesn't need to be personal, but feels personal. If it feels personal, it is for you. So an example would be, say a wife whose father always said, you look beautiful, walked in the room and said, oh my gosh, I love your outfit. Always affirmations, all day, all the time, affirmations, putting that little girl on a pedestal. And so she meets this guy at college, they have a great time together, they have fun, they go along, they date, they get to a point, they get married, they've built a home together, the honeymoon stage is over, life exists. And he comes in and she's wearing a brand new dress, or she's doing something, and he doesn't say anything. And what is that message that she gets? Does she get the message that she's no longer wonderful, that she's no longer special? But maybe he grew up with parents where the father never said a word to the mother. They've been married 35 years, as happy as sandpipers, absolutely get along, have a great relationship, but part of that relationship isn't affirmations about how the mother looks. So now we have that sensitivity in that wife, that sensitivity that, oh my gosh, he doesn't think I look good, and then that's how we snowball down the path of discourse, where we don't understand each other. So in the theory that I work in, we look for 4 things. We look for what we call the DEEP acronym. We look for your differences. And those differences is how you see parents. We have couples where maybe the mother-in-law comes in all the time. She just walks in, she's in there, she's always directing, and maybe one of the partners doesn't care because it's their mother and that's what they've always experienced, and the other has grown up with parents that don't interfere or don't have suggestions. And then suddenly we have this dynamic where the household has changed. And so we have to look at, how do we see those differences? How do we see extended family? How do we see our parenting? We have different parenting styles. I have a really cute story. I in England, and maybe this is old school England, when a child bites another child, you bite that child that bit, because you don't bite them where you break skin or you do something horrible, but you give them a bite that they say like ow because it hurt. Mm-hmm. And they do it all the time in England. I mean, even now they do it. I mean, it's just a common thing to do, so a child can see, like, it's painful, and when they see it, they usually never bite again. And so I was at I was picking up my daughter's son, who I was babysitting for. They were both in Canada working, and I walked in, and the play school said that he had bitten like 5 children that day, and he keeps biting. So I said, oh my gosh, I said, and I took his hand and I bit his hand. Well, they went crazy. They grabbed this child. They wanted to call Child Protective Services, and they kept saying, we need to call his parents. We can't turn him over to you. Well, that was a cultural thing for me. That was a difference. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But if you don't talk about your differences, that's a cute little story about cultural differences. If I said to anyone, really, most people in England, I would say, have you ever bitten your child? They would say yes. if they're a biter. And
yeah.
But there are many differences, and parenting is a really big one of them. And I found during my research the most visceral arguments and the most difficult interactions were over children, more so than over sex or money or extended family. It was over the children.
Well, that's one thing Wes and I did before we had our daughter. She's 9 now, almost 10. But anyway, we talked about how we wanted to do things. Are we going to spank them? Are we not? What are we doing? How we, And one thing that we both agreed on that we had seen a lot of was parents not following through, saying, stop doing that, or this is going to happen. And then they kept doing it and nothing happened. And it was like, get your butt up off the couch and go follow through type thing. So that was one thing I think we did good, was we talked about for parenting. So I just want to toot my horn.
Yeah, I love that. I'm always telling parents, don't say you're going to say you're not going on the cruise or I'm canceling Christmas. Because
right.
You know that's not going to happen. You have to follow through, and you have to choose something that you can follow through on, not something that you can't. If you say, well, I'm taking your bike away for good, well, you know that's not the case.
Right.
And so in that moment, it's very important to be consistent. And I think that's one of you brought a lovely point to the podcast, is that you really do need to have these conversations. You need to talk about, how was I parented? Not just how do we want to parent, but you actually need to sit down and say, my dad did this and my mom did this, because in that co-parenting conversation, you may miss out on something that you do subconsciously, that your parents did. You may not even think that it's odd or not appropriate, but that's how you were brought up. So it's really great to say, what was it like when you were a little boy? I mean, what were your parents like? Who disciplined you? How did they discipline you? What did you get in trouble for? And you have those conversations, and they become very constructive in building a foundation for good parenting. I think you can have it across the board. I think you need to have it with extended family. What does that mean? What does it mean over finances? When I was doing my research, if I had asked anyone before the research, what do you think the biggest issue is for couples, most would have said either physical relationship, sex, or finances. Mm-hmm. But we know through my research, which was based in empirical studies too, that the main issue for all of these parents is that all of these couples was parenting. Because I would say to them, you know, what is the most difficult situation for you both? What is it where you have the most discourse? And they say parenting. The kids.
Yeah.
So every one of them, every single one of them. And so that gave it validity.
Well, the thing I want to get back to is step number 1, knowing yourself before you enter a marriage. I'm 44 and I'm still learning about myself. That seems like the hardest thing. Will that ever get solved? How do you know yourself when you're 20-something years old getting married?
Right.
I think that if you, I believe that every one of us brings something into the relationship that has dysfunction. I don't believe there's such a thing as a child that grows up with no dysfunction of some kind. It doesn't have to be severe. It doesn't have to be because of abuse or neglect or abandonment, but we bring something in, something along the line of our growing up where we have that moment, that trigger, or that feeling of feeling inadequate in some way. Even if we've done the best job we can with our kids, we still have peer influence, we have early, relationships, maybe a high school relationship. We have things that tweak what we take forward into our world. So I recommend really that everybody do their work in therapy. I really do. And that isn't from a standpoint of you should go to therapy because everybody is broken. I think people go to therapy because they are strong. Because people that are weak or don't really want to look at themselves very rarely go to therapy. Strong people walk through that door and say, hey, I want to be the best parent I can. I want to be the best spouse I can be. I don't get on with my mother. I really want to build that bridge to understand my mother and father. For some reason, I have this area that's missing. Because if you have that area that's missing with your own parents, there's always going to be a loss in your marriage because of it. These wounds don't just go away. They get a Band-Aid or they get pushed down. So I think it's great to look at yourself, and I think it's wonderful to really do couples therapy before you marry. There are a lot of different organizations that do couples encounter. I married in the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church has you go to a couples encounter before you can marry. It's engagement encountering, it's called. So we met with an old couple who were very, very sweet, and so we met with them every week. But we never worked on the issues that we actually had that pushed us apart. The very issues that were about what we believed. It was a wonderful time, but I don't believe somebody who isn't a professional who understands couples really can get to the very core of what could be Vesuvius in a marriage.
Yeah.
That's why I think a couples therapist is a better idea, especially one that is focused on just couples.
Well, I think also something that's important is in looking at things and seeing couples that have divorced who got married around the same time we did and everything else. There was a different mentality going in, whereas I think Wes and I both went into, this is marriage, we're taking our vows seriously, this is a lifelong situation we're entering into. Versus some of our friends that were getting married at the time that were like, hey, this is a party, we're getting married, but you know what, if it doesn't work out, we can always get divorced. I think, that kind of mentality is a big game changer as well.
It is. If you go in with the right mindset, that's what you're saying.
Yes.
And I think that's terribly important, that there are certain things that even going in with the right mindset, saying divorce is never an issue. I'll be quite honest with you. Not all marriages should stay together. There are marriages that should break up. There are happier couples that are divorced and parent better. Not all marriages should stay, but I do believe an awful lot of marriages that divorce, these couples go on to a second marriage, it's the same kind of person, or they have the same issues, they go on to a third marriage. This isn't really what makes up happiness. Actually working on the one you're in really can produce a long time sense of happiness and security. There are some ground rules going in that are very important, and I think one of them is not only discussing what we talked about, your differences, talking about your external stresses, your emotional sensitivities, your patterns of interaction. That's what we do in integrated behavioral couples therapy. We're looking for those so we can help you understand them. But also, a lot of couples don't commingle their funds. And I will tell you, as silly as that may sound right now, that is a huge factor in successful marriages. There is a trust factor that goes along when you merge your incomes. Mm-hmm. Couples that tend to keep their finances separate, it leads and it brings in sort of an idea that there's some trust that isn't there.
That's one toe that's still outside the door. It never fully entered that relationship.
Yeah.
Right. And definitely that was in my case. Our income was separate. I never knew what his bank account had, and he didn't know what mine had. And even being a product of a divorce, as I did my research and I talked to these couples that made marriage work, I realized so many of these things were things that we did which devastated the relationship. The very things they saw and worked on as strengths, we were tearing each other apart with. So I do believe that if you really think about it, there are tons of couples that don't get divorced, but they still have parenting issues, financial issues, extended family issues. They have differences and they stay together, and they want to stay together and they're happy. And so I think that we have to really look at what is it that makes them work. My book, The Rules of Engagement, I that's where I interview these couples and I talk about the things that make the relationship work.
Well, you interviewed couples 16 years together or over, you said. What is...
So they had,
I don't know, I haven't Googled it, but what is... Does the divorce rate severely diminish when you get to 16 years? What do we have to look for? What's the number, the magic number that you should be set? Is there a magic number?
No, I think divorces come in all years. You can be married 50 years and get divorced. You can be married 7 years and get divorced. I think divorce has become an easy route to leave a relationship. I think that I think one thing I think in an unhealthy marriage, those ability to leave a marriage swiftly is fantastic. If you're in an abusive marriage or a marriage with any form of addiction that you can't handle, or anything that doesn't work, that is really truly creating this very, very unhealthy environment, then it's wonderful that you can divorce differently than you could in the old days. However, it does then create the monster that people who might reconcile have a quick, swift end to their marriage. And even in some states, I know that you have to do some kind of reconciliation work before you can divorce. But we need the right kind of reconciliation work. Not all couples therapy is equal. It really isn't. I have couples come to my room that have been in couples therapy once or twice before, and this is their last-ditch effort. So in the theory that I work in, integrated behavioral couples therapy, we're not looking for you to change the other person. We're looking for you to change yourself. We're looking at you to find an understanding of what you bring to the relationship, your parents, what you bring with your external sensitivity, your emotional sensitivities, how you bring those into the relationship and how they affect it. So one of my couples, they are an Indian couple, and they had different things going on. They went through therapy with me. They're still doing great. And one of the things that happened was that she would make him brown rice, which he absolutely hated. And as simple as that sounds, that was like a visceral explosion for him. It's because you don't listen to me, you know I don't like it, it's about you do just what you want, it's as if I have no voice, that I'm not important, that you can't even make me white rice when I hate brown rice. But in their last session, he says in the session, he says, I realized today that she makes me brown rice not because she wants to not do what I want. She makes me brown rice because she loves me, and because she knows it's healthy, and she knows that it will keep me here, and we will be married for a long time because I will be healthy.
Wow.
But I still don't like brown rice.
That's awesome.
You see how the brown rice was personal before. Those visceral, those poignant moments in time when couples are fighting, it's usually become very, very, very personal. And when we actually unpack it, especially in this theory, we actually look at it to make it into what it really is. It's an issue that one likes one thing and one doesn't. It isn't about the conflict of inflicting something on another person. I do this one little story too when I'm in therapy. I tell my therapists so they sort of understand that idea of issue and personal. You're driving into a car park. They always ask me what car park is, so I can't remember what it is here. Like a parking structure.
A parking lot.
Yeah, so you're coming into a car park, and you come in, and one partner says, there's a spot right there, and the other partner keeps driving. It's like, it's right there. And then they pull into this spot over here. And so at that moment, there's this conflict taking place, like, oh my God, there was a spot over there. You could have parked right there. You didn't park right there. So there's three messages in that car, actually. One is, you didn't pull into that spot, you don't listen to me, you don't do anything I ask, it's all about you, you do just what you want, you override anything that I ever do. The other message, when the one that pulled into the spot, you emasculate me, I can't even pick a parking spot, I'm not smart enough or able to even pick a parking spot. That is personal. The issue is, there's 2 parking spots. There's more than one. But it doesn't really matter which one you pull into. You might be irritated that you didn't pull into the first one because it's closer to the elevator. But it doesn't become personal. It doesn't then become, you're doing this to me. And so I tell that story whenever I start therapy, because it gives them an understanding of the difference between making something an issue and making it personal. And personal only comes from your history. It comes from what you've been taught and how you feel and what you believe about yourself. More often than not, it's that script that now has been written into your behavior with your spouse. So that's sort of a little bit about what IBCT is and how we look at those differences.
Also, we told you that, we talked before we got married. We talked before we had kids. But it's also very intimidating as a parent to know that your kids are looking up to you, and it's going to affect them for the next 50, 60, 80 years of their life. And it's just, that's scary.
I love that, because that is so true. Because if you think of my mother, even in her 80s, was still my mother. I was still her daughter. Right. And she still carried the wooden spoon if she was going to give me a whack if I didn't do something. So we never became equals, and I think that's what parents make a mistake. You will never be your daughter's friend. You will always be her mother or father, which is so much greater than being a friend. You will always be the parent, and that role no one can take away from you. But parents want to identify with their children in a way that they sort of equalize that role. I always looked up to my mother. I always turned to her when I was at my saddest time, she was always my mum. And that's what we want our children to do. We want them to look at us as their parents. And my girls share things with me, and they come to me when they're hurt, but they also share things with other people, and I don't know those things that they share, because maybe there's things they share with their friends that they don't share with their mother, and that's okay. And so you have to look at the role you want to play. And I've co-parented as a divorced woman since my children were 2 and 3, and never during our time, my former husband Ron and I, have our children ever questioned what one of us has said. So this is in 2 homes, if I told the girls they couldn't do something, they never asked their dad. And if he told them, they never asked me. Because even in divorce, which is what my second book is, Soul to Soul, I've just gone to print this week, we were able to co-parent as parents, not as adversaries, not as competitive members of this family, but as a unified parenting structure with no intimacy other than we care about each other and we respect each other, but we parented as a couple and as a family. So I think you're right. Parents need to be able to play a role in their children's life, but as you said, you will define that child's life for what it becomes in its own relationship. So you have to do the best you can. So you two better be doing a good job there.
As if I wasn't on edge already. Just get the awareness just hit me.
Yeah.
But no, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for doing this. We still have 7 minutes left, so I want to try to get some stuff out real quick. No, I wanted to ask you about that, and you just touched on it. That was like my next question. How do you get the kids to understand divorce? Do you talk to the kids? Is that a thing too? Do you have children come into your office and just have council meetings with you?
Oh, I have tons of children that come in my office, and sometimes after I've had them in for the very first session, I send them out and I say, I need your parents. Because, and I tell them, I need to get your parents in here. And I do, and I help the parents, whether I get them in, very rarely do I get them in together, but sometimes parents will come in together if they are able to put their differences. In my book, my new book, I write something and I say, you have to love your children more than you dislike your ex-spouse. That is important. If you can remember to love them more than you despise that person, then you're on the road to be able to co-parent. And children really do suffer. In the back of my second book, I have what we call the divorce diaries. And so some of the kids that came in, some that I don't see, they wrote the story of what it was like. And parents should read those stories, because that really, they most probably will find their own child in there suffering. And so it's important that you can love your children more than you need to hurt your former partner.
It hurts me just thinking about it. I mean, we're outside looking in. We're not, we're not divorced, but we see divorced. I mean, at the grocery store, you can see, well, your father said that, but no, that's not how it's done here, or, whatever. And playing the kids off the other one. Yeah, well, your dad's an idiot or whatever. And it's like, it hurts. I can see the poor kid just confused. And then they have to judge. Is mom bitter? Is mom... But they don't have those... They don't have the tools. They're trying to find their next peanut butter and jelly sandwich. They're trying to figure out, they have other things on their mind. And putting them in adult issues, it hurts me thinking about it.
But they become pawns on a chess set. They are the carrier of information. They are the carrier of secrets. They are the carrier of not being allowed to be themselves, because maybe they will say something that will trigger the other parent. And I think that is one of the things that needs to change in society. The fact we have so many divorces, that we need a program of how do we help couples get through the pain of the divorce onto co-parenting successfully. And certain things are definitely against that. The legal system is, for one, against that. The visceral fights that take place, the negotiation by attorneys leaves many couples even in more conflict than they were when they started. So there's a lot of things that need to change. We do need to have a divorce system that works for everyone, including the children, and then better understanding of what co-parenting means. For Ron and I, we would be at school in the breezeway, and we'd be talking to other parents, and they would say things about something, and I'd say, well, at my house, and he'd say, well, at my house, and in different conversations, and they would say, why do you guys have two houses? And we'd say, because we're divorced. And they would say, oh my gosh, there's no way you two are divorced. But that's because we co-parented. We still do today.
Wow.
We get together. Today they're in their 20s, and we get together and we say, oh my gosh, what is going on here? And we discuss it on how we're going to handle it. Still today, even though they're very independent young women, they still depend on us for certain advice, and we discuss that, and we are very united, and we have been. My girls, although they are, do have a feeling, sometimes that sort of divorce issues come in, they're very minor. On the big scale, they're extremely healthy, and as they've got older, they are so appreciative of what Ron and I have done as parents. Extremely. I mean, their friends have always come over, and I'll be here, their dad will be here. So it's never been this contentiousness that so many kids have to go through. Well, and that's my advice to parents. Learn to try and co-parent. And my second book covers that.
Is that on your website?
It isn't yet. It's in publication right now. I'm just doing the final editing of it. It will be in print most probably within 2 weeks. Ready. It'll be in Amazon, Borders, all the different areas. Where my other book is, The Rules of Engagement, Growing Side by Side. That one's on all those book sites as well.
Awesome. Now, what about the TV show on JUL-TV? Is it in post-production, pre-production? Do you have episodes up already? How does that working out?
Yeah, so that's another area that I'm involved in, and what I do on that show is I bring in couples. Well, actually, I was going to bring in couples, and what happened was I ended up having couples that one partner wouldn't want to come in, so the other came in on their own, which actually worked pretty well. So we talk about an issue that relates to their interaction. So these are couples that are pretty stable in their relationship, but there's that thing that needs to be tweaked. And we've done 3 shows, and I do know that they are up. I can't really tell you where because I'm sort of out of the loop until I have my meeting, but we are moving forward with more shows, and that is also called The Rules of Engagement. It is on my website, OneillPsychology.com. There is a what they call a sizzle on my website. So if you go to the blog area, or I think somewhere on my website, you will see that sizzle if anyone's interested.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been, I have so many more things, but we're just running out of time. I want to talk to you about military families. I talk to you more about the kids and divorces, but that's just depressing me because I just think of my poor kid, any of my kids going through that. It hurts my heart to think about. But you're fantastic. Maybe we'll have you on again when you get a full season out and it's starting to be syndicated, and we'll get you on there and promote again. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And you know what? This is the first time we've actually had a real conversation. We spoke a little bit on the telephone, but I'm as happy as a sandpiper to actually get this thing done. That's a cute little saying I got from Dr. Dorothy O'Neill, and I'm going to keep it. You were awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, stay on the line real fast. I have a couple things I want to talk to you right after we get off the air. On our TV show, Wes Iseli's Magiclife is on Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, Android TV, and the JUL-TV app. and tons of other places. It's in over 100 million households. All you have to do is look for it. And it's now in syndication, so check your local listings. And check out wesisley.com for all of our awesome show merch, and logo, t-shirts, and all of that. See you next week. Check us out online at wesisley.com and patreon.com/Wes_Isley for behind-the-scenes videos, blooper videos, never-before-seen footage, discounts on merchandise, magic trick tutorials, and more. That's Wes Iseli, spelled Wesiseli.